Awesome. All right. Hi, everybody. We'll wait probably another minute or so for people to roll in for our live stream today. But just as that happens, I'm just going to give some introductions about how today's going to go. So I'm Tucker. I'm the Director of Product Management over here at Crema. And we have Allison and Michael here today, both members of our product management team. We are missing one of our team members, Brandon. He started his vacation a little bit early by taking the day off for a well-deserved time off. So we'll kind of pour one out for him today since he can't join this discussion, but maybe in the future he can join us. But what we'll be going through today, we're going to go through just some normal topics that we discuss as a team. So every other week we meet as a team and we talk about what's going on in our work lives and our personal lives. And part of that, we also talk about learnings and challenges that we've been experiencing on our projects. As product managers, we don't really have much opportunity to work together. Whereas developers, for example, might work together on a project. We all work on our own separate projects for the most part. And so that's really a time for us to learn about how our different products are going, how our teams are doing, and really just focus on that constant improvement. So I think we're 1 minute past here, so we'll probably just go ahead and jump into some questions. The different topics that we're going to cover today, they're around product teams, psychological safety, constant improvement, decision-making, switching modes in product management, and then ambiguity in product management. I can't promise we'll get to them all. It's quite a bit of questions related to each one of these topics, but we'll get through some of them. But I'll start first with product teams because we might be having people join us today that maybe aren't familiar with the term, maybe aren't familiar with Crema, maybe they're new to product. And so just kind of wanted to set the baseline here and talk about what we mean by product teams. So Michael or Allison, do you want to help define what we mean by a product team?
And go. All right, so yeah, I'll kick this off. So product team is really a cross-functional team of multiple disciplines. So in our case, since we do digital product development, you might have a front-end developer, a back-end developer, a test engineer, a product manager, a product owner or a strategist, all working, and also product designer, all working towards a common goal of what you're trying to do in terms of building a really effective product. What's also, I think, important to note about the cross-functional nature of product teams, at least the way that Crema views it, is that we see these roles, even though they're unique disciplines, we see them as T-shaped roles that specialize in whatever their craft is, but they're also generalists in that they're able to collaborate with one another so that way we can really focus on achieving that ultimate outcome.
Fantastic definition. The only other thing I'll add to that, just for the folks on that might not know this, we also define that, at least at Crema, as being a relatively small team. We have found that when the team gets to be a certain point in size, it gets to a point where it's easier to break the team up into two different teams. So that way things can remain efficient and there's not so many people in a meeting, especially now when we're all in remote meetings where it's hard to get a word in, especially, if you have 12 people in a meeting, it's really difficult to speak up. So we do believe that good product teams also include it being small. But speaking of good product teams, so now that we've defined what a product team is, what do we define as a good product team? What makes a great product team in terms of traits that they have, in terms of how they collaborate cross-functionally?
Take this one since you took the last one, Michael. So these are just my opinions, but based off of the different teams that I've worked with, the best teams have very specific traits about their personality and about how they approach their work. So when you think about your product team, obviously the cross-discipline nature needs to be really important, but also, are these people willing to kind of go above and beyond? Crema, we're really lucky because we hire very specifically, and so that's just the nature of the people that we hire. But maybe you work for a company that isn't like that crazy intentional with vetting people's personalities in depth before they get hired, right? Maybe you've got a product team that was spun together across a bunch of different teams that maybe hasn't worked together. So the traits that you're looking for are people that are willing to go above and beyond. And what I mean by that is specifically ownership. So taking ownership of not only the work that they're doing, but the product that they're building. Taking ownership of all of the wins, all of the successes. You got to take ownership as a team. Same thing goes for ownership of failures. So if Billy in design, messed something up, that's a team ownership. Really trying to take that on and try to solve for it moving forward. So that's one of the biggest and most important things for a highly successful product team, in my opinion.
Definitely. I like to think of it as product teams specifically that run well together are essentially a team of problem solvers, professional problem solvers. And what I mean by that is that we're all capable of solving problems. We all just maybe have our own bent or expertise in a certain area. But I like to use this example where, developers, they specialize in writing code, but that doesn't mean that's the only part of their job. It doesn't mean that we should only just give them, okay, here's what we need you to do. It means they can also help us solve these problems way earlier before they even touch code, so that when they get to that point in time, they're writing the right code, or at least validated better through all these other people that are on the team. So yeah, anything else that either of you want to add to product teams and what makes them work well, or how to better define them, or why they work well for us?
The only thing I would add is they should have comfort with ambiguity. So one of the things that we value, and we'll get more into, is just being able to be flexible, but of course going towards that common goal, that common product that we're building. But also in the path of going there, you need to have people that are not only really relentless in trying to go down that path, but also relentless in understanding that they can learn down that path, and the things that you learn might change the nature of the plan. And so being able to be comfortable and thrive in that type of environment is just a really key trait of product teams.
Awesome. So we'll move on to, speaking of traits, I'm terrible at segues, but we'll just move on to the next one here. Psychological safety is a trait of a good product team, and or having that at least is a good trait of a good product team. And so that word can get thrown around, but a lot of people might not fully understand what it means. So when we're talking about psychological safety, how do we normally define it as a team?
Well, it's my favorite subject of all time, so I'm going to take this. So when we talk about psychological safety, you think about the team that you're in. Maybe you guys use Slack, maybe you use some other sort of communication tool, maybe you use Zoom, meetings like this. If you're in a space with other people, do you feel comfortable enough to ask a potentially silly or dumb question? Do you feel comfortable to fail? Do you feel comfortable to say that you messed up? Are you in a space where you have comfort knowing that you won't be judged, you won't be, yelled at? Are you psychologically safe? And so, yeah, it is a really big and robust word, and sometimes it can be a little scary for people, but it's really about making sure that you have comfort in the room that you're in or the environment that you're in to make a mistake, to learn from it, and that other people feel that level of comfort too.
Yeah, it really allows, when psychological safety is being cared for well, it allows those people to bring their whole selves to work and not have to hide these other parts of them that maybe will help lead the team in an even better direction, right? Because they might not feel like they can bring this thing up. There has been a project I was working on probably a few years ago now, where they had, like, it was something like they had a drop down for gender, and it was a binary option. And had I not felt psychologically safe to be myself in that moment, I may not have brought up the idea that they need to have more than just the two binary options there. And so I think that's a good example of, if you're not psychologically safe on the team, you might not ever say that. And that can go further into the product, and the bias can be built into the product. And so I think that's why, or one of the many reasons why it's really important. How do we go about creating this on our own team? So we talk about our hiring practice, and you know, there is the part of that. But if we have psychological safety and it's working really well in our teams, how do we create that environment? Maybe for the folks out there that either have a team that they don't feel this on right now, or maybe they're spinning up a new team and they just want to make sure that they create this type of environment.
That's really good. I mean, where I immediately go to is, first off, it starts with you as the product manager, or the person on the team who is kind of taking this initiative underneath your belt. And the reason why is, it's like, I think, you know, there's a lot of tactics we can get into in terms of how to structure, like add a structure that supports psychological safety, but how you actually interact with others is what's going to set the stage. It's going to set the example. It's going to set the subtle expectations that in turn proliferate throughout your team. And so for me, like, this means starting every conversation I have with a perspective of empathy, understanding that the team member that I'm working with could have a ton of other things going on in their life. And I want to make sure that the conversation isn't necessarily like kind of fogged up by any of that. You know, it might be fogged up by that, but like, I don't want that to get into the professional dialogue that we're having and impact that. It needs to be a very safe environment, so that way we can really discuss what's going on at hand, but ultimately be able to continue to move forward regardless of what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Allison, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I want to, double down on what Michael said. Like, it does start with you. You can try and hope that everybody else might want to push for that as well, but you are a great example, and others can kind of really take from the example that you set, no matter what role you play on the team. I know that I am the first person to admit when I mess something up, and yes, it's embarrassing, but you know what, maybe it'll give somebody else the encouragement, and maybe they'll feel like they can also, speak those truths when they happen to them too. So yeah, set the example.
Yep. Yeah, we'll get into this maybe a little bit later around different modes in product management, but one of the initial ones is about early in the phase when you're starting a new team and you're in this storming phase. It's important that you focus on that team coordination and creating. That's where a lot of your energy is going to be put into at the very beginning of something. Is if you invest that energy into that first, all the other stuff comes so much easier because your team is functioning well. They trust each other. They respect each other. They know how to argue, or not argue, but debate each other. And without that, it's kind of an uphill battle right out of the gate, and it's a lot of work to kind of go back. Now, if you are in a position where you do need to go back and have some level setting conversations, running a really in-depth retrospective. We talk about retrospectives a lot if you've seen any of our content, but we mean it. There are a lot of different types of retrospectives that you could run. Even if you're mid-cycle on a project and you need to kind of do some level setting on the team. And so if that's something that you're interested in, we have lots of content around that. You can feel free to check that out. But that's, I think, another good way if you're kind of in the middle of it to take a step back and evaluate how to move forward. So what happens, speaking of psychological safety, if somebody happens to break that trust on a team, what is our role as product managers in that? So whether that's a client, maybe it's another team member, maybe it's an outside vendor that we're working with, what's our role on the team as product managers if we see that happening?
Well, it's going to happen. People are humans. People are going to make mistakes. So assume that it's going to happen. Assume that somebody's going to slip up and say something or do something that might come across in a way that it shouldn't have. And it could, give a little bit of wave in the water, for lack of better analogies. So first off, assume that it's going to happen. But also assume that people have best intents, right? Like, I'm hoping or hope that you've had this conversation, or you will have this conversation. It's not something that's coming out of left field, the topic of psychological safety. If you haven't, then definitely have that conversation with your team. But understanding that everybody's kind of leaning into wanting a psychologically safe space and coming to the table to do what they can. When and if someone messes up or you mess up, you've got that to fall back on of, you know what, they have good intentions, or I had good intentions. We just have to call it out when we see it and make sure that we level set as quickly as possible. Sometimes it takes an apology, and sometimes apologies are a little bit hard, but owning up to it, addressing it, and making sure that you can do, or you do whatever you can to move past it, and don't make that mistake again. I just had this happen. And it's not fun. It's not a fun thing to be like, hey, what's going on here is not helping our environment, and I need everybody on the team to hold themselves accountable and to hold one another accountable, because we're all in this together, and it's not a perfect fight to get there, and there's always opportunities to grow and get better. So call it out, address it, make sure that you assume best intent, and keep pushing forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So
very well said.
Oh, go ahead, Michael.
I was just very well said. I was only going to add too, it's like, this is also a Band-Aid you got to rip off quickly. Like, you might have a meeting where you notice that trust was broken between some team members, or team members and a client even. And trust me, I've been there multiple times where you're just like, okay, you leave that meeting, there's just this weight in the air, and it's up to you to do something about it. And you got to pick up the phone, or you got to walk over and talk to that team member or that client and have that conversation as quickly as possible. It's not fun, but always when you go in, as Allison was saying, assuming good intent, you're going to end up much better on the other side of that conversation.
Definitely. So clearly nobody likes having hard conversations, but they have to happen. I think we end up having a lot of these throughout our careers, just by the nature of our role to some extent, especially at Crema. Just so everybody on the live stream knows too, the product managers at Crema are also the people who are directly client facing most of the time. That's not to say the rest of our team members aren't. They certainly are. We pride ourselves on being really collaborative with our clients. But the product managers are usually that lead person that is working with the client. So whether you're having a hard conversation with a team member, or on the client side, or another vendor, for example, what are some ways that you all prep for that? So I know we don't typically just jump into a hard conversation just out of nowhere. Usually, at least for me, I'm taking some notes, I'm making an outline so I don't get too off track, that kind of thing. So I'm curious, how do both of you prep for those hard conversations that have to happen and that will definitely come up?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said what I start with immediately too, which is make a rough outline, just some personal notes as to how am I going to broach the subject of this difficult conversation. But in that outline, what I also do is I make a very important priority to think about what are the possible ways that this could go. And it is very humbling to do that, because you have to think about why you might be wrong, or your team might be wrong if you're talking to a client bringing this up. And that empathy allows you to go into that conversation not only much more open to how that might play out, but it also allows you to go in much more confident to find a path towards an agreeable resolution.
Yeah, Michael, I agree with that 100%. Making sure that you can look at it from all different angles not only gives you the empathy to, present the message in a way that is considerate of everybody's perspective, but it also gives you the most information that you need to deliver the right message. The only thing that I would add is specific examples. This is something actually Tuck taught me is that, when you're giving feedback or when you're receiving feedback, the best thing to use is specific examples. So anytime that you've been given feedback at work or at home, think about those instances. And when you've had a specific example presented to you, then you've got something, actionable that you can move from. And so offering that up to the person or the team at the other end of this feedback that you're giving is a very generous and important thing to do, because without specific examples, we can't always assume that everyone is going to grasp entirely what we're thinking up in our head. So if possible, bring specific examples.
Yeah, those are really good tips. Just a couple other ones that I want to add to that is, never making it about the person, making it about the problem at hand. People naturally want to get defensive. I'm so guilty of this. They want to get defensive anytime you get them feedback because it's like, oh, well, I thought I did just fine or whatever it might be. But if you can make it more about the problem at hand and the impact that that had on the team or on whatever else it might be, it kind of removes that person directly from it. They can kind of see how, yes, I contributed to that, but I see how this is a problem that we need to solve. And so it can kind of break down that wall and let them know right out of the gate, hey, this isn't about you personally. This is just about something that we need to solve for that went wrong. And I think that can help a lot. And then the other thing is making sure that if they are sharing with you, and this goes back to psychological safety, but because it's a two-way highway here. If they're sharing with you the way that they feel or the emotions that they're feeling because of that, you can't argue that. I mean, you can, but I don't think it's a smart thing to do because you can't argue how somebody's feeling. They're feeling that way no matter if you tell them they shouldn't or not, right? And so make sure that they feel heard in what they're hearing. So if they're frustrated, make sure that they understand or you understand and you say to them, hey, I get that you're frustrated by this. Here's the impact of that on the team or whatever it might be. Trying to keep it general so we don't get into any specific examples here, but I think making sure to never argue emotion is really important in these hard conversations because people are naturally going to feel emotional when they're being given feedback. All right, so speaking of giving feedback and keeping to move forward, let's talk a little bit about constant improvement at Crema. So it's one of our values. We talk about it a lot. It's really important to us. So maybe let's just start first. I kicked off the call today just kind of as a summary or review of these discussions. We have these discussions on a regular basis. Of course, we usually get more in depth in terms of specific maybe issues on products that we're working on. But outside of this and this type of discussion, what are ways as product managers that we continue to keep learning?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't love it in the moment, right? And no one loves this, but like when you mess up or you have a big problem or something goes astray or something goes wrong, like that's the biggest and best learning opportunity out there. And then, like you mentioned, we do meet as a team and we discuss it. We dive deep into it. If you maybe are by yourself as a product manager, or you have 1,000 product managers at your organization, trying to find a group of people that you can discuss these things with is going to be really important. If you have a mentor or a sponsor or whoever in your life that you can bounce ideas and situations off of, that is the best way to learn. And then don't quote me on this. I know we're on the internet and we're live, but I love Medium. Like I love reading Medium articles and I get on their email list. There's such a good market out there for product managers and people are telling their stories. They're telling their stories of failure and how they got through it. And there's been many instances that I've been able to avoid a similar situation happening because I've taken, 15 minutes to read a couple of posts about somebody going through something similar. So if you can avoid failure, if you can't avoid it, experience it, learn from it, grow from it, and then try to find people out there that you can, bounce ideas off of or learn from and avoid those situations happening to you personally.
Yeah, those are really, really good. And to add to that, like I personally am obsessed with like cultivating a really a good selection of blogs and websites and just individuals, brilliant individuals in the product space, just to keep learning from. And so I'll subscribe to newsletters from Silicon Valley Product Group or Ben Thompson at Stratechery. It's amazing when you are able to embrace your industry's news that you're working in. And so for us in digital product development, that means subscribing to a lot of tech news sites to see kind of like what are the big new trends. And like last week, many of us were glued to our screens watching Apple unveil the new operating systems because that affects how we ultimately build our apps that we build. And so on top of that as well, like just ravenously follow people on Twitter or LinkedIn that you maybe look up to their careers in product because they're always putting out great stuff, and also interact with them as well. Don't hold back from dropping in a reply and starting a dialogue. It's always incredible to me how sometimes I'll say something on Twitter that maybe isn't stupid for once and is actually smart. And then the author of that person like responds, and it's like, whoa, like I just had a short dialogue in public with this like really awesome thought leader in product. So highly recommend cultivating a system that aligns with where your niche is in product, where you want to grow as a product manager, and then also engaging with that system as well.
Yeah. Yes to all of that. That's all great. I would say one more area that I personally try to do as much as possible to continue to learn, or I guess maybe a couple of areas, are this just gets to a point where I start to nerd out a little bit, but I like to use new products all the time. I like to test new things out. I like to try new methods of things. It's not so much from a point of view of trying to find the optimal process. It's just a different way of thinking or trying something out that challenges kind of the status quo in my mind. And so this means keeping an eye on things from Product Hunt, from different websites that are calling out new apps on the market. I'm on the App Store all the time, just kind of scrolling through the different lists that they have. Everything from, personal development things like journaling apps and meditation apps, things like that, to more professional grade tools. And so I think always experimenting with those types of things, maybe not committing all the way, but just seeing what's out there can also kind of build out your repertoire of just different ideas to pull from, because you might be in a meeting or you might be in a session where you're trying to talk about maybe a new feature or what a new feature might look like. And you might unconsciously start to pull things from all of that you've seen over time. And you could provide the team with ideas from that. And so I think that's one way that I continue to keep learning. The other thing I try to remind myself is that it doesn't all have to happen this week. I don't need to know everything to know about product management this week or the latest this week. I found myself getting overwhelmed at times because there is quite a bit of content out there to sift through. And there's so many different newsletters that things get busy sometimes. And then I find myself, I haven't looked at anything for 2 weeks. That's okay. Product management isn't going anywhere. Like all that content's still going to be there later. And so just kind of reminding myself that we also learn through the practice. And so it's good to read, it's good to look at all these things, but a lot of learning comes from our own mistakes and our own wins that we have. And so just kind of remembering that, so when we do get busy, it's not like we're not learning, it's that we're just learning a little bit differently. All right. And then when it comes to constant improvement, how do we maybe help others on our team improve? So if you maybe you heard somebody on the team struggling about something in particular, how might we help our team with that?
I love to kind of like take on a role of like being a cheerleader of sorts in conversations, because generally what I've found is at least people on our team, they generally know where they need to improve, or maybe they know what the path that they want to go in terms of like professional development. And so as product managers, we're at this like really nice spot on our teams to find opportunities for them to actually live improving in that direction. And so you might have roles that want to become a little more cross-functional. And so you're able to figure out ways that like on actual client work often, that cross-pollination can effectively happen to help that team member improve or grow in that area. And what's really cool is like, it's not just valuable for that team member, it's also valuable for the team as a whole to get closer together, to figure out new ways of collaboration. It's great for the client's results. But just having that positive vibe of really trying to be a cheerleader for your team, I think go a long way.
To add on to that, like as a product manager, you're in a really special position in correlation to your teammates. You're not their manager. You're not their equal. You don't work in the field that they work in specifically. Like you're not a developer, right? You're not a designer, test engineer, but you are with them all the time and you manage the project that they work on. So you have an incredible opportunity to, if they're trying to improve in an area and they want you to help give them feedback, you're somebody that is non-threatening in a way that they feel like, if I do fail or if I need to grow in another area, I can really trust this person to be honest with me. I can trust this person to, be keeping an eye on these things regularly and bringing them up. And I feel like I can have a conversation with them. I think that as a PM, you have a really special opportunity to be that person's like check mark, because again, like you're in a kind of a non-threatening position in correlation to other people. You're really there to help support and all reach a goal together. And the best way you do that is being the best version of yourself. So offer yourself up, if you know somebody that is trying to work on something, say, hey, I'm happy to keep an eye on that for you or give you feedback if you would like. That's part of your role, trying to make sure that the team is optimal.
That's really good. Well, something you just said, Allison, reminded me of something I've done a few times. Probably both of you have heard me say this, and other team members that might be watching this as well. But there have been times where I've been working on a goal, but progress on that goal is something that's hard for me to measure on my own. I need other people to tell me if I'm doing better at that. But I don't necessarily want it to be public to everybody if I'm working on this specific thing. And so I've even reached out and said, hey, Allison, hey, Michael, can you, when I'm doing this thing, or I'm working on this thing, can you let me know what you observe over the next several months on this? And so then I'll check in every few weeks on that specific goal of mine and say, have you noticed any difference in this? And so I think opening yourself up to the team to come to you for that as well, I think could be really good, because they might be wanting to work on something, but maybe don't want to make it public, but might need some feedback from you. So opening yourself up to that, I think is really good. There was one other thing I was going to say. Now I can't remember what it was. So I'm just going to leave it at that. We did have a question come in here and I do want to answer it. So they said, how do we handle situations where a client wants to own scope, but ultimately holds the product managers accountable to the outcomes? So I'm curious how both of you might handle this situation.
I have 1,000 questions to clarify what's going on.
Same.
So assuming that the client wants to own scope, in scope, I'm assuming not only it's the work, but potentially a timeline, and they are directly holding the product manager accountable if they don't hit those things. So without all the details, the best thing that I would do is take a second and make sure that when you're making decisions throughout the duration of a product or a project, you're including the client in those. At the end of the day, like at least at Crema, our client are usually the ones who are the product owner in a situation. They decide, with the team's help, where we're going to go, what we're going to do, and what we're not going to do. So the first thing I would do is really ask yourself if you've been inclusive of them in these decisions that you're making. Are you making them in silo? Or have they been attuned to what's going on? Are you discussing the trade-offs at every decision that's being made? At that point, it really can't be a single person's responsibility because it's a collective decision. The trade-offs, if you're going to do a bigger feature, it's going to take more time or more resources. And everybody should be aware of those things as they're coming in so that when you get to the end of the road, you're not, on deck to get yelled at for it, right? Like it should be a collaborative effort throughout the whole thing. And if it has been that way and you reach the end of the road and you still feel like you're the person that's really getting kicked because you didn't hit this timeline, going back to those specific instances where these decisions were made and these things were talked about, that's going to be the best course of action. And, obviously, like we've said before, not making it about the person, making it more about, specifically, this is what happened, this is what was decided on, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, that's my advice.
Yeah, and working off of that as well, like some ways that I've managed this through my product teams is inviting the client in specifically to like user story estimation sessions, because those are like when the team actually does get into the nitty gritty of saying, well, we're estimating it this really high point value because of X, Y, and Z. And so you get to have that dialogue. And even if the client is a fly on the wall at that point, they are hearing what that potential complexity is, and that could potentially affect the product down the road. Let's say, worst case scenario, you have a client that is asking this of you, but also isn't available or doesn't want to join these meetings. Well, then if you're logging these discussions or logging these estimations in a tool like Jira or Asana, then you can just comment and include the client in that comment. So that way they're getting those notifications of, okay, this was estimated today at X because of these several reasons, which allows a dialogue to start then rather than later.
I have one more thing to add on that. Sorry, Tuck.
You're fine.
But like Michael said, using a tool like that is so helpful. And Jira and Atlassian, they integrated roadmaps with their next gen projects, and they've also got roadmaps in their classic projects. Using a tool like that and giving incremental updates, regular updates as to where you are and where you need to go, that can only help you and to make sure that that communication is really clear every step of the way.
Yep, that's great. I think, just to add, everything you all said, I think is right. The only thing I would add to this too is that this sounds like it provides, I'm rereading the question here, but it sounds like it provides a good opportunity for some education. Like just even the wording that was used here, but holds product managers accountable to the ultimate outcomes. That's a good opportunity to let the client know, one, they're part of the team, and two, the team is accountable to the outcomes, not just the product manager. They might help shepherd the team that direction, right, to the outcomes, but it's ultimately the team. And I think making sure, we've talked about making sure that they understand the complexity behind what they're requesting. That's a great tactic, because 9 times out of 10, what they think is most important and must have probably can be nice to have if they realize how complicated it is to do. And we can find a smaller way to do it. But then there's an education aspect of this where they can, you either have to limit scope for a release, or you have to extend time for the release. So what is most important? Is it more important to release by a certain date, or could that date be flexible within a 2-month time span? Well, if that can be flexible, then we can take on a little bit more scope. If it is rigid, then we're going to have to cut scope. And I think kind of doing that education and describing that to them and helping them understand what those trade-offs actually mean can go quite a long way, especially if you have a client or somebody that you're working with that maybe hasn't been in the product world or isn't familiar. Maybe this is their very first product that they're building. They might just not know. And that's not a bad thing. It's just an opportunity for some education. Yeah. Great. Okay, so when we think of decision making, what is the role of the product manager in decision making?
To make all the decisions. Just kidding. No, it is, if you're making all the decisions, you're doing it wrong. The product manager's role in decision making is to, I would say, take on the role of an educated facilitator. First off, the way that I work with my product teams is I always approach it from, I know the least amount. I know the least amount about the tech that we're using. I know the least amount about why we're doing the direction with the product design. I know the least amount about our users. I know the least amount about the stakeholder pressure that maybe the product owner is feeling. It doesn't mean I don't know anything about those, but there's roles on that product team where it is their primary responsibility to know X amount about those types of things. And so being able to facilitate the team towards making decisions together is incredibly important. And if there is a tiebreaker that needs to happen, I would also say you're not the tiebreaker there either. At that point, perhaps the product owner is the tiebreaker, or if it's a technical decision, perhaps a trusted developer on your team is the tiebreaker. So it's very vague in terms of how decisions are reached. You're very responsible in helping make those decisions, but you're not the one who should be making those decisions, if that makes sense.
I will say there are instances where you have to make a decision. The majority of the time it should be a group effort. I agree with that wholeheartedly. But when you get into some of the nitty-gritty smaller decisions that have to be made, maybe you're in a sprint kickoff, or you're reviewing a story, and they're trying to decide if this color should be used, and or this action should be taken, and it's something that's really minuscule. Those decisions, you can use your context, you can use the team around you, you can make those decisions. You should feel empowered to make some decisions on behalf of the product that you're invested in and you're working in. Never feel like you aren't empowered to make decisions, but it benefits the team if the team is making them. So I would echo what Michael said, like at minimum, don't make solo decisions, right? Try to make it inclusive of the whole team. But if you get to a point where a decision has to be made and it's small enough that you don't feel like you need to pass it along, feel confident in yourself and your experience to make those.
I would say that this is kind of what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. It's no decision is better, or sorry, a decision is better than no decision. And so just moving forward with something is what you need to do to move the team forward. And if you're stuck, obviously get as much context as you can before you make that decision. I think the one thing that's important to also remember regarding context is that let's say there's a junior team member on your team. They might have way more context on a certain issue. Just because they don't have experience in it does not mean that they can't solve this problem or help with that decision making. Actually, I would argue that the more context that somebody has, the better decision that they can make, not necessarily experience. And so I think even reaching out to those team members is important during that decision making process. All right, let's switch gears a little bit. Actually, I just had one more question come in. I'm going to read this real quick. Can you give us an example on how you communicate when clients requirement, or sorry, can you give us an example on how you communicate when clients requirement and what the user actually needs are different? I get stressed out just thinking about it. So yes, we've definitely run into this. You have the client needs, you have the user needs. Where do you meet in the middle, and how do you have that conversation?
Michael and I made the same face.
Yeah.
This happens to all of us, right? Like, it's not new where a user, we're building products for users. Our users should be the ones whose opinion is really highly valued. But at the end of the day, maybe there is pressure from internal stakeholders that want X or Y, and that conflicts with a user's preference or desire. And that's a really hard battle to fight because at the end of the day, if you can't find a common ground, one person is going to be unhappy. It's hard. It's a case-by-case navigation system, at least in my perspective. As a product manager, it's my job to advocate on behalf of the end user, but it's also my job to advocate on behalf of the business. And so searching for that common ground and trying to find it, because you have both of those situations in mind, is the best thing that you can do. You might not reach it, and you might have to settle one direction or the other. But that's the very least that you can do, is try to advocate on behalf of both of them. It's not an easy thing to navigate. So yeah, it stresses me out just reading that too, girl.
Yeah, it is incredibly stressful. And I will say one lens or two lenses that have helped me navigate these is asking, is it a consumer product or is it an enterprise product? Because navigating that conversation is generally different towards both. The user, hands down, always should be treated as priority in terms of what the user feedback is, how the feature might impact the user. But I think that's always going to have more weight on the consumer side, whereas on the enterprise side, there's a little bit more digging to do, because sometimes the end user is different from the user. And what I mean by that is sometimes the user of the product is an enterprise, the one who's paying for the product, which could be a board of stakeholders that have financially invested in creating that enterprise app. And so they may see themselves, and they may, at the end of the day, if you kind of follow the lines, be the user, because they might be representing a potential client deal that they're trying to cater to this enterprise app to. It doesn't mean that the end user should be deprioritized, but it does change the lens of how you might approach that conversation.
Yeah. Really, it's about one way to think about it is the impact of it in terms of how many users you have on the platform, right? If it's a consumer product like Michael was talking about, and you have thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of users using it, it might be a little bit easier to make that business case to go down what the user needs are, right? But like Michael said, if you have a client and their requirement is to build out this new feature, well, maybe do some digging on that. You might find out that the feature that they're requesting is because that's going to allow them to win a $2 million client. And there might only be 10 clients on this platform, right? And so that then becomes a user need because it's a $2 million client that's getting ready to come in if you build that feature. And so there's always something floating underneath the waters there. It just, you need to dive a little bit deeper to understand the impact of it before you truly do make a decision. It's not an easy one for sure. All right, and we have another question, but I'm going to save it for the end. And it's about kind of continual improvement, but what the latest and greatest is that we've read or listened to in relation to product management. And I'll hold that one for the end. But I'm going to move on to a topic here that we have for switching modes in product management. So we've kind of alluded to this a few times, but we know that as product managers, it's been described as, we can wear many different hats. There's a lot of different modes we need to switch into different times. And so I'm curious, what do you both see as the different modes of product management, or maybe just some of the different modes, because there's so many of them?
So I'm trying to think of like a comprehensive list. So I'll just say a few, and then maybe Allison and Tuck, if you want to say a few. One that comes to mind is facilitation. Another that comes to mind is, I guess, kind of doing the grind of writing out initial story map or user stories for team review.
I mentioned this earlier, but advocating on behalf of the team, advocating on behalf of the product, advocating on behalf of the client. You have to take in perspective everybody's, insight into what's going on during any decision that's really being made. I'll say the hardest one for me to latch onto in my product management career has been being a champion for the team, but also not fearing to hold people accountable. I like being the person that people like. I like being friends with people. I like being nice, and holding people accountable was very scary for me to do because you have all these other things going on too. So as a product manager, you're your team's cheerleader, champion, encouragement, but you also have to crack the whip, if things are going south. And for me, that was the hardest one. I still sometimes struggle with it, but yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Allison shared this article. So Allison, I'm stealing this from you, but it's an article on Medium. I can't remember who wrote it, so apologies for this, but it resonated for me because I've heard of this model in terms of teams and thinking about different phases teams are in, and those are storming, norming, and performing. And there are many different variations of that model, but the idea is, in the article that she shared out, was that product managers need to serve different functions on the team based on where your team is at in that life cycle of storming, norming, and performing. And so at certain points in time, part of your job might be more business owner, part of your job might be more vision holder, and part of your job might be more team coordinator. And especially in that early phase, like we talked about earlier, being that team coordinator and kind of rallying everybody together to perform well is going to be way more important than necessarily holding the grand vision of things, because the vision's not going to go anywhere if you don't have a good team. And so it's just kind of like having to constantly evaluate and switch those hats or switch those modes that you're in to best fit what the team needs in that moment. I think that if you try to put yourself in this one box, and this is all I'm going to do, then I think you run the risk of probably pissing off your team to some degree, right? Because they're going to be expecting you, or they're going to need somebody to be helping with things, but you're going to be like, oh, that's not my thing, that's not my job, like so on and so forth. But I think good PMs recognize that and they just fill in the gaps where they're needed. And so, yeah, that's a long-winded way. I don't know where I was going with that, but business owner, vision holder, and team coordinator are all kind of different hats that you wear at different points in time. But speaking of that, what are some gaps? So Allison, you mentioned this, where holding people accountable was probably one of the bigger challenges in terms of like having to crack that whip, and just like at certain points in time it just has to happen. What are probably some of your most fun areas to fill gaps in terms of different hats that you have to wear?
Yes. I love learning about new stuff. Like, I think most PMs just nerd out about learning about new stuff. So it's really exciting to me when we get to like play around in new tooling. So when I first joined Crema, we were using Sketch, and I was able to get in there and play around and help fill a gap where we had a designer leaving the project, but the client needed some tweaks here and there, very simple things like a word to be changed in an image. And I was like, I'll give the old college try. Got to learn a new tool. Same thing goes for Webflow and playing around in Figma. I won't touch any code. I'm not doing that, but being able to like learn and fill in gaps, really small ones, right? Like at some point you need to step back and bring in that resource, but getting to learn new tools and learning, a specific role that is beyond yourself helps you to better understand and empathize with that person. Now I know how much of a pain it can be to try to sync Sketch to InVision when that little widget is out of date. Like I get it now, right? And it's context that I didn't have before. So those are my favorite gaps to fill, or roles that I don't inherently play, but the client needs something. Google Analytics, that's another one. Like, it's just fun. It's fun to learn more about stuff that you don't already know. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that's really the same gap that I was going to talk about. And what I'll add to that is at Crema, one of the things we do is every other Friday, we have what's called Venture Lab Friday. And as part of that, you can choose to work on learning something that's like outside your traditional craft team role, your traditional domain. And for me, from time to time, that might mean like following a coding tutorial so that I can like learn game development or augmented reality. I can't code worth anything, but what it does allow is it allows, as Allison was talking about, it allows us to eventually create empathy in those conversations with our team when they do come up. It allows us, when we're talking to prospective clients, to be able to relate to the challenges that they might be wanting to undertake. But it's also just a lot of fun.
That's awesome. If there was one hat that was my favorite to wear at any given time, or a gap to fill, not really a gap, because I do think it's important for us to be part of this, is in that really, really early stage where somebody's coming to us with an idea, whether it's a client, it's a potential client, whatever it might be, and we kind of get the chance or the permission to just kind of help shape what that might look like. I like being in that. One of my ways that I get energy is working in teams. And so anytime that we can get a team together and I can help kind of like help everybody get together and shape that and where that might go, that's the hat that I think I like to wear the most, kind of in that early kind of strategic spot. But speaking of that, and we'll do this question and then we'll end on what we've read or listened to lately. What is your favorite thing about product management at Crema?
Do I have to pick one?
You can pick as many as you want.
Cool. So honestly, I like having tough conversations. Like, that's not something that I enjoyed doing, before I came to Crema. Now I actually like them. I get like a little bit of like a, my heart rate increases. It's a little bit of an adrenaline rush because I know that I have all the tools and resources around me to make sure that this tough or hard conversation ends up where it needs to be. So weirdly enough, like I get excited about it. I don't know, maybe I'm crazy, but the thing is, I love it because it's just changed so much for me. It used to be terrifying, like couldn't move, wanted to throw up, to, oh, I got this. Like, I can handle this. Beyond that, the trust that your team has in you, the trust that leadership has in you, like, you are the master of your craft, and you are trusted to, do what you need to do to get the job done. If you've got a new idea or a new suggestion, people are going to listen. People are going to be willing to try it out. And I really love that. I love being trusted to lead the team in a way that I think is right. And I love being trusted when I throw weird ideas at my team and they're like, okay, we'll try it. It's really nice. So those are my favorite.
That's awesome. For me, it's going to sound super cliche, but it's doing what I love. It's fortunate that at Crema, we get to put on our creative hats every day and work to collaboratively solve our clients' problems. And for me, like, I love working with our team full of creatives that are passionate in their craft, be it developers, test engineers, product designers, and more. And it's really great to have a role that is product management, which is kind of situated and connected to all of those roles. And so we don't necessarily do those types of crafts, but we get to collaborate with them every day. And it's just a really great way to be creatively engaged, and just work with a bunch of really awesome people to do really awesome things.
Oh, they're making me smile. You guys are great. So I would say that my favorite is probably problem solving in teams. So I love problem solving, but specifically within a team environment, I think is and that's going back to the very beginning of this conversation. That's why we center ourselves around product teams. But I can't wait for those moments where we have a new problem that we need to sink our teeth into and figure out how to solve. It's just so exciting to me because of the energy that gets, even virtually, when we're getting into a Miro board and we're trying to figure out how to solve for something. It's just so cool. So I would say that's probably my favorite. All right, so we have a couple more questions here. So let's see. Is there an interesting, sorry, I'm trying to read these before I say them so I say them right. All right, so this one, is there any interesting story for when we first became a product manager? That one is probably another story for another time because we only have 3 minutes left, because I'm sure we all have very interesting stories. I know I do, and I'm pretty sure the both of you do as well. So maybe we'll do that a separate video or maybe in our next live stream. But let's end on the question, what's the latest and greatest that you've read or listened to in relation to product management?
So right now I'm reading this book called Coactive Coaching. And the reason I mention this is because at Crema, one of the agile methodologies we practice is Scrum. And in Scrum, our roles sometimes take on the form of Scrum Master, which part of that responsibility is to be a peer coach for your team to help work through problems and challenges that might need to be navigated on a daily basis. Coactive coaching is about how do you have those types of discussions, specifically through the power of asking really intentional questions. And most importantly for me, how do you really engage and listen to that, to your team member, and make sure that you're truly in the moment and addressing what is being brought up.
I've been nerding out learning about modern agile. They've got a handful of YouTube videos. They're not as long as their podcast, but I like listening to those. It's just interesting. I don't know. I'm still trying to decide if I love it or not. So that's one of them. And then another one, and I'm not trying to butter up to Dan and George. So if you're watching, that's not what I'm trying to do. But on Sundays when I deep clean my house, I would put on option 5 because it's on YouTube and it'll just stream. And I feel like I learned a lot, not only about why they have made the decisions that they've made, but how I can incorporate their decision-making process into my own life and in work, and I like them as people. So it's good. It's good stuff. Check it out.
Definitely check it out. Shameless plug. I was actually going to say that too. So yes, I do the same. And I would also say, so this isn't, this might be a little bit of like just getting out of the question, but you mentioned in relation to product management, maybe not directly relational to product management, but the podcast series by Adam Grant called Work Life is really good. And it also has, since I am in a little bit of a leadership position, it also gives me a good understanding of like what good work life is supposed to look like and new ideas and new ways of thinking. And so I've been listening to that a lot. I was way behind and I've been catching up. And so that's kind of been one that I've been really geeking out on lately. But at the end of the day, it is all about people and how they interact with society, with products, and it gives me a good, well-rounded view into that world, which I think can go into how we build products at Crema. So cool, that's all we have time for today. We are right at time. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe on our channel. We'll continue to do these, not just this craft team, but other craft teams at Crema. So if you're interested in more, definitely like and subscribe. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye.